Good afternoon and welcome to TCAM Thursdays, your midday cultural break. I'm your host today, Dr. Lona Reeves, the Education and Community Outreach Director here at the Kansas African American Museum. And today we're going to be talking the Wichita Monrovians and the Colored Western League, as well as Negro Leagues baseball with our own local expert here in Wichita, Dr. John Dreifort. Hello, Dr. Dreifort.
Hello, Dr. Reeves. Good to be here.
We want to tell our audience just who you are today.
Well, I'm Professor John Dreifort at Wichita State University. My real expertise is modern European history with an emphasis on French and diplomatic international relations during the 20th century. I've been here for over 40 years, close to 50 years, as a matter of fact. And I've written a couple of books on the French diplomacy of the 1930s and 1940s. But beyond my interest and research in the area of French diplomatic history and French politics, modern European history, I've had this fascination with baseball. And over the years, I've become more and more interested in it, partly because I played it in college. My sons have played it. I coached it. I'm still coaching it for high school players that are playing right now. And it's become, an interest, a fascination. And I teach a course on the history of baseball at Wichita State every spring. I call it Monday Night Baseball. And we get together and talk about the history of baseball from the beginning. So with all that in mind, people tended to ask me, well, would you talk about this or that? And it's always interesting to do some digging around. This topic today is really fascinating because it's gotten me back into looking at some microfilm and doing some research on the topic that I know a little bit about, but has not been really in the forefront of my research in the past 10 years or so. But my interest in baseball has been long and ongoing. And as Dr. Reeves and I were talking about before, I've had a couple of sons who were college All-Americans at Wichita State University. One played on the 1989 College World Series championship team. And the other one played 11 years for the Los Angeles Dodgers and was the college baseball equivalent in baseball anyway to the Heisman Award winner in football. There's a thing that's called the Golden Spikes Award that's given every year in New York, and Darren Dreifort won that in 1992. 93, sorry.
Awesome.
So long background and history of baseball, and that's why I find it fascinating to come and talk about it.
All right. We're glad that you were able to stop by today as well. I know one of the things that we really love to talk about here at the museum is the Wichita Monrovians. Now, I kind of like history, I like sports, and I like learning new things. But all I really have been able to learn about the Wichita Monrovians is the big game. You've heard of the big game, the June 21st, 1925, right here in Wichita, Kansas, at Ackerman Island, an island that used to be here that had this remarkable diamond that the city just used to love to go and watch the big games at. And so it was, like I said, June 21st, 1925, when the KKK #6 Wichita branch played the Wichita Monrovians, who were part of the Colored Western League. What can you tell us anything more about that big game?
I think it's important to put some context around it because I think the level of interracial baseball had already begun to develop rather well in Wichita prior to that KKK game. But the KKK, I think, was under heavy pressure from the politicians in the state to begin behaving a little bit more appropriately. Certainly, they were not nice guys, okay, but they were in danger of losing their charter. And they needed to show some civility, I think. And one of the things that they could do was play baseball. And so I think it wasn't that they were so eager to play the Wichita Monrovians. I think they needed to show themselves as being a bit more civil than they had been. Keeping in mind that the KKK was anti-black, anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant. These were people who were large in number. I think sometimes it's forgotten that there were almost, and again, who knows? There's nobody taking a
Mhm.
census, but there were probably almost as many KKK members in Wichita as there were African Americans in Wichita. So the balance was very close,
Mhm.
and I think it made the game in 1925 even more important, more relevant than it might have otherwise been. There were some perhaps 40,000 KKK members in the state of Kansas in the 1920s. So it was a major force to be reckoned with, and so I think it's the context of that game is really important to keep in mind. The other thing that I think, and I just realized this going through the microfilm in preparation for this, is that 3 days after that game,
Mhm.
there was a national convention of Baptists held in Wichita at the Forum. Over 2,500 registrants just for that meeting, and this was, I think, an element that was not favorable toward African Americans at that time either. And so you have a rather charged atmosphere in the city. That's
Mhm.
coming along. The KKK is doing their thing, and the Wichita Monrovians are playing a game with them. And so it's that context I think is important to keep in mind. The other thing I found fascinating is that in order to try and keep a balance in the game, so that one side would not be accusing the other side of favoritism, it was proposed that two Irish umpires be provided.
Mhm.
A guy by the name of um, Irish, I can't think of his last name, Garrity, I think Irish Garrity was one of the umpires, and I think it's interesting because the KKK was as much opposed to Catholics as they were to African Americans. And
Mhm.
so here are these two Irish umpires that are going to be brought out there to provide some balance. Now, whether
Mhm.
they actually did that or not, I don't know. The records of the game are, you know, hard to come by. In fact, it took 2 days before it ever appeared in the newspaper who won.
Mhm.
So it was hard to know whether those guys actually were the umpires or not. But there was some effort to try and provide a balance to the whole thing. And as Dr. Reeves pointed out, or it's well documented, the game was very close, back and forth. Very close game for about 5 innings, and then was back and forth between the two teams before ultimately the Monrovians prevailed 10-8. So it was a big deal in a charged atmosphere. And Ackerman Island, where the island park was located, was an amusement park in the Arkansas River, just south of where Exploration Place is now. It was packed, and the advertisement that came out, or the announcement was in the paper that attendees ought to leave behind their bull whips and their razors and all that. I think was a little bit of hyperbole, but you never know. I mean, that may have been part of the way in which to bring people into the park by saying, "Oh, there might be something going on there," and the curiosity seekers would show up. But by and large, most people behave themselves very well, and it was the event really of that summer, I believe.
Okay. Now I know we have behind us here the latest exhibition, or part of, or I should say, a mini exhibition as part of our latest ongoing change up here in the main gallery. And as you can see right here between us is 1925, the Monrovians versus the KKK. And there's that one of those articles that you were talking about.
Right.
Only baseball is on tap at the Island Park. Clan and color team to mix on the diamond today. And one of the things that it establishes here too is that part of what was going on at the time was that the governor was anti KKK and was really in favor of them leaving. And at the same time, the Wichita Monrovians, they were like on a roll, really playing some really dynamite baseball at that time. And they had a standing um, challenge, so to speak, that they would play anybody, um, and expected to win. I
Yeah.
mean, they had a pretty awesome. What was it?
50.
52-8
Yeah.
that season, that first season that they had here in Wichita. So yeah, they were doing really pretty awesomely here. And like I said, the Supreme Court, I think eventually, I guess it was the governor's name was Henry Justin Allen at the
Right.
time. And
Hey, Wichita.
oh, another
Yes.
Wichita. All right,
The
awesome.
Allen House in Wichita. Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
all righty. And you know, really anti KKK. And
Right.
then even the big newspaper guy, William Allen White, was anti KKK. It was one of the reasons why he had said when he began publishing his paper that he would never run for office. But the issue of getting the KKK out of the state was enough to make him change his mind and want to run for governor. And kind of how, like I said, the Wichita Monrovians, they were the darlings of the African American community, and um, and were just one of the stellar teams of the Colored Western League at the time.
I go back a second and remind folks, however, that the uh, Western Color League only lasted 1 year. The local newspapers tended to cover the Western League, in which Wichita had a team called the Izzies, and they garnered all the publicity. There was some publicity about the Southwestern League, which included teams like Salina, for example. So they got publicity. And then there was the usual major league rundown and synopses and standings. There really wasn't much space left in a one-page sports page. We're almost getting back to that today.
Right.
For coverage of anything else. And so the Monrovians really did not get the coverage that they deserved, for sure. Neither did the league. But periodically, there would be some mention of games that were going to be played. But you have to look really hard, if at all, to find what the results were. And it's hard to know why that was. A racial prejudice. I think to some extent it was simply a matter that the newspapers tended to cover the other leagues that existed at the time. But there are stories as to why that league folded. Not so much at the end. It sort of just came to a whimpering halt at the end of the season. But midway through, there were some stories about league politics. The president of the Wichita or the Western League, Western Color League, was from Topeka, and he fired the secretary of the league, who was from Wichita. How much of this was personal, how much of it was really business, it's hard to know. But there were accusations of misappropriations of money. There were some teams that claimed that they were being mistreated or not getting their fair share of the financial returns. And so this is in June of 1922 when this league played. So it's fairly early in the league, and I don't believe that it got a whole lot better going through the rest of the summer. And I think by the end of the summer, it was that kind of thing that brought about the demise of the Western Color League. But the Monrovians then and subsequent to it were such a great team that they were willing to play anywhere against anybody. And they did so. And in fact, I think there were several reasons for it, but I think that's the way they made money. I mean, they offered challenges to different teams around the area, whether it was in Kansas or Oklahoma, and go play. And sometimes it was a matter of they would split the pot. Sometimes they passed the hat. Sometimes it was winner take all. But as a way of barnstorming, is what they called it at the time, around the Midwest to raise money. And so you'd find, even at the time of the Western Color League, that some of those teams would go off and play a schedule of their own independent of the league. Now, how that worked out with the league, I think may have been another problem. I don't know. But there's just the fact that the Monrovians were so good teams were willing to play it, and they were willing to play anybody as well. So even up to 1925 and beyond. That's why when they stepped their foot on the field, it was a big deal.
Right. And then too, quite a few of those Monrovian players, it was kind of the stop off on their way to play for the Kansas City Monarchs as well, which was really one of the most phenomenal teams of the National Negro Leagues.
Yes, T.J. Young, who I've always thought was a catcher. T.J. standing for Thomas Jefferson Young, played for the Kansas City Monarchs. Knew Joseph, another Monarch, went from here to Kansas City. So there was some back and forth between the various clubs in the region, but the Monarchs, of course, were the most outstanding Negro National League team of the 20s and 30s and 40s, for that matter. And so if you got a chance to play for the Monarchs, you really were stepping up. And I think T.J. Young, when he wasn't playing for the Monarchs, played here in Wichita or played in the area. There was a interracial team, integrated team in 1933 from Mulvane that T.J. Young was on, and tried to get them into a higher level of baseball. I think he was not successful with it, but so he didn't leave and go to Kansas City and just wave goodbye. He came back periodically to the city, and I think was a factor in African American baseball for the rest of the 20s and 30s. So there were lots of people. I think one of the things about the Monrovians, and I think this was true for most teams, African American or white or Hispanic, there was a lot of coming and going of players. Even in that 1922 season where they ended up supposedly 52-8, early in the year, I've seen a standings where they were 6-4. Barely in second place behind Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City had a great team as well. But subsequent to that, I saw that various players from Oklahoma City came to Wichita to play with the Monrovians. And I suspect that the reason the Monrovians took off in the second half of the season, and I have never really seen that final record. I'd like to see some more evidence of that, but if they did take off, I think it was partly because they brought a lot of players in and improved their team as the season went along. But this was not untypical. Players came and they went. It was professional baseball in a way, and the contracts were, very sketchy in some ways. And, Satchel Paige, the great black pitcher that came to Wichita in 1935 to play in the NBC tournament. If you paid Satchel enough, he'd go anywhere. Okay, whether it was on that team that came down from Bismarck, North Dakota. Really?
Right.
Bismarck, North Dakota had African Americans on their team. Satchel Paige was the key. Why? Satchel Paige, was a great pitcher. And
we had a picture of him up there, but I know we did have one upstairs.
It's one on the bottom there. The picture
Okay.
down the bottom. Yeah.
Okay, Satchel Paige is there. Yeah. But we have a picture too here in the museum. There they are, right there. The North Dakota Bismarcks at Lawrence Dumont Stadium in 1935 when Satchel Paige came down. I know it's one of the things that people really love because it's right up there here in the museum. Love to see that when they come in.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because he was definitely a crowd draw.
Oh yes, he was
and I think that's probably one of the reasons why there was so much moving around on the teams, because that's what helped get people in the seats to watch the games and take care of the players. And I know the Monrovians were like I said, they were the darlings here at Wichita's African American community, because the community took care of them and they took care of the community.
Yes, that's an important point. I think in many ways, baseball in the 20s and before was very much like the earliest games in the 19th century. There was a social element to it. It wasn't just playing ball. It was a place to socialize. Oftentimes there would be uh, banquets or suppers or picnics or whatever around the game. And people came to see the game, but also to socialize with each other. And I think that was clearly the case with the Monrovians. And the fact that they had a park to play it in was, I think, a real asset as well. This was really where a lot of really great baseball occurred. A lot of socializing occurred, not just for African Americans, but for whites as well. They drew everybody, and partly because they played such a good brand of baseball. If you want to see good baseball, you want to see the Monrovians play.
Because I know one of the things that they did, like I said, they took care of the community, and there was a home, the Phyllis Wheatley home, which I think it started out as a place for when African Americans first came to town, a place for them to start out, like kind of like a halfway house to get set up, to find jobs and find a place to live, that kind of thing. And then later on, it became basically the Phyllis Wheatley Children's Home.
Right.
So it was there to take care of children who had were maybe orphans, or had issues, that had family issues, that they were able to go and stay there. And the Monrovians were key and instrumental in providing funds to keep that house running. And it was here in Northeast Wichita.
Is it still there? Do you know? Is it still active?
It is not active anymore. Okay. But like I said, here in the museum, we have a series, Defining Black Wichita, which discusses the three major periods of African Americans here in Wichita. In the very earliest of days, we're right here in this part of Wichita, and Water Street, where we're located here in Wichita, was known then as Church Street. And up on our journey through Kansas, one of the main walls up there basically is part one of that, when it was in this area. Part two talked about when they moved up to the Northeast Wichita area, when it would have been during this time period when the Wichita Monrovians were here. And then part three will be here in the main gallery this fall.
Oh, very good.
The next exhibition, we just opened a new one, Portrait of a Man, which is really phenomenal. And of course, we said Time at Bat, which is actually going to be, it's a traveling exhibition, which will be available at some of the events that we'll be hosting as part as with the Wichita Public Library and the city of Wichita, Wichita's diverse history of baseball, which this event is also a part of. So, like I said, we're really glad that you were able to come down. We've been trying to do this for a while, and thanks to people getting out there and getting their vaccinations and taking care of business, we're able to get out there and do some things. So thank you again for coming down. And I know, like I said, we're sitting in front of this case full of all this awesome stuff from the National League, Negro National League team, the Kansas City Monarchs. Is there some interesting stories that you'd like to tell us about them?
No. Well, of course, the Monarchs were, as I said before, the dominant team in many ways of the Negro National League, set up by Rube Foster in 1920. But I think a lot of people don't realize that they were really innovative in a lot of ways. Not only their barnstorming, but they were the first team that really brought lighted night baseball to Wichita. And they had their own portable lights and generators. They were on a telescopic kind of arrangement, and they carted them all around and played night baseball. So they were innovative in a lot of ways, and a lot of really big time players played for them. And there's a great African American baseball museum in Kansas City that is really very, very well done. And if anybody gets a chance to go there, it's worth your time to do it. So the Monarchs really were a major player, literally and figuratively, in baseball in the Midwest throughout the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. So, and of course, Buck O'Neill, the great Buck, was one of their most prominent players. He was a good player. He was not probably in the same classes as Josh Gibson and such, but as a face for the organization, you couldn't have had a better ambassador for not only African American baseball, but for baseball generally. So.
And they just observed their 100th anniversary
Yes,
last summer as well, didn't they?
yes, yes.
It's amazing.
Dr. Reeves, it's I think another element that needs to be kept in mind when we talk about the background and the situation in 1922 and 1920, 21.
Mm-hmm.
We've just gone through the 100th anniversary
Oh.
of the Tulsa race riots.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there were some major race riots, not so much in Wichita, but Independence had a major race riot.
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of the charged atmosphere of the
Mm-hmm.
city and the background to interracial baseball,
Mm-hmm.
I think that needs to be kept in mind as well. This
Right.
was this was a major issue in the early 20s, and the KKK was stirring that pot. And so it
Strongly.
puts even more
Mm-hmm.
emphasis on the fact that Wichita, at least, could play a game, maybe for reasons that were not all that altruistic on the part of the KKK. But the fact of the matter is that Wichita could play it
Mm-hmm.
and play it, cleanly and benefit the city from it.
Right. That was an amazing fact about that is that they were able to do that, and it happened during and at a time when, like I said, the Tulsa massacre is just observed its 100th anniversary at the beginning of this month on May 31st and June the 1st, and this would have been 4 years before, this game, the big game, would have been 4 years after that event, in which, and even that summer, it wasn't just the Tulsa massacres, but it was several events like that across the country, as far north as Minnesota. People always think that everything is always in the South, but that
Yeah,
kind of, racial upheaval was going on all over the country.
right. Yeah, 1919. I mean, it was a year of tremendous upheaval, not just race riots, but social riots, political riots, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a major period of upheaval. And if you look at 1921 and the Tulsa race riot, well, that's important. But the Monrovians come along in 1922, the next summer,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and are able to make their mark, drawing not only African American fans
Mm-hmm.
but white fans in Wichita as well. So, it context I think is important to keep in mind when looking at these events of 21, 22 through 25.
Right.
So,
Kind of amazing. Yes, indeed. So, like you said, I understand too, because we haven't even mentioned this, that you have written a book about baseball. You want to tell us a little bit
well,
about
it's
that?
an edited collection that I use in my history of baseball class. I teach a course
Mm-hmm.
in history of baseball every spring. I call it Monday Night Baseball at Wichita State University, and because I had coached it, because I had played it, because I had this fascination with it, somebody said, "Well, why don't you just teach a class on it?" And so I finally decided, okay, I need to do it, but I need some material to teach from. And a good friend of mine, Benjamin Rader at the University of Nebraska, had published a textbook on it. I called him. I said, Ben, I need something to go along with your textbook. He said, well, why don't you put together a collection of essays? I said, well, I said, tell you what, I've made available, I put together myself some things. I'm going to send them to you, and you put it together, talking to me. So I was kind of boxed into a corner. I had no choice
Mm-hmm.
but to go ahead with it, and it turned out to be fine. Um, the introductions and conclusions and analysis and so forth are mine, but the essays are essays that cover a wide range of things, from the beginning of the game in the 1800s, really up through the end of the 20th century, and we try to deal with not only racial issues but business issues, cultural issues. The title of the book is Baseball from Outside the Lines.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about the game per se, but what's
Mm-hmm.
happening around the game, the social, the cultural, the political, the business aspects of the game that you don't see on the field but are important.
Okay. So
So,
tell me this, as a history professor and a person who is fascinated by baseball, when you look at baseball back in its earliest days, even in its heyday, and then you look at it today, Are there any comparisons that you could draw?
Do you have all day or no? Um, well, the game, it evolves constantly.
Hmm.
And I think this is one of the benefits of, I guess, of being a historian. All the things around us we see seem to be so difficult and historical in the sense that it's never been done, but not really. I mean, we've been through difficult times before as a nation, and the game has been through difficult times and changes.
Hmm.
I think the emphasis on the power game today, home runs, I think I've gone overboard. But it's partly because the media is fascinated with it. You never on ESPN you don't see many great defensive plays. They always show you the home runs that are being hit, and it seems like the broadcasters try to outdo each other and trying to um, make their call on the home run as extravagant as possible. So I think we're going through a moment of history where the home run has got probably a bigger impact on the game than it should. But we've been through this before. This was true in the 20s
Hmm.
when Babe Ruth came along and totally changed the game in terms of how the game was played. Not just home runs, but because he hit home runs, pitching had to change. So that it influenced the game tremendously, and that came in the aftermath of the great World Series scandal in 1919, the Black Sox scandal of throwing the World Series, and the game was really down. And you have these people come along at various times that pick up the game and repopularize it and revolutionize it, which is what Ruth did. In many ways, baseball is a reflection, a mirror of the country. And it's the way I teach it in a sense that as the country evolves, so does the game. And in some ways, the game has actually been ahead of the country. And I give you 1947 and Jackie Robinson breaking into Major League Baseball.
That was a question I was going to ask you.
Baseball was way ahead of the country at that point.
Hmm.
We're 7 years ahead of major changes on the political front. So, uh, it the game and the country have flowed together over the centuries, and I think it will continue to do so.
Well, it's always a big toss up. Is baseball America's pastime or football America's pastime? So,
Well, I think baseball. I'm prejudiced, of course, in this, but
yeah.
I think baseball grew up with the country.
Hmm.
Football is a relative latecomer. It's not really until we get into the 1920s and even beyond that you really begin to see much in the way of football.
Hmm.
But baseball been out there reflecting and influencing the country since the 1840s, basically. And for those who are interested, one of the things we learn in the course, my history of baseball course, is no, it was not Abner Doubleday at Cooperstown where the game was invented. It didn't happen that way. The game grew up, and the game grew up with the country,
Hmm.
and so in that way, it's America's pastime. And if you look at the number of people who go to baseball games versus football games, football is like, oh, we got these huge crowds. Well, yes, you do, 16 times a year, okay,
Hmm.
in your city. Baseball plays, 81 games in your city,
Yeah,
okay. And over the course of the year, you're going to have more people attend those games than you have football games, okay.
most definitely.
So, you know, it's an interesting debate that goes back and forth, and it's a healthy debate to have. But in the way that the game has influenced the country and the way the country has influenced the game, I think it still has that connection that I think is still relevant today.
Awesome. So, thank you so much for being with us here today on TCAM Thursday. I just want to remind you all again that Wichita's diverse history of baseball is what this show is a part of the programming for that this summer with the in collaboration with the Wichita Public Library, and that you can go online or stop by the museum. We have these wonderful cards that is full of the activities that we have going on this summer. especially starting June 1st and rolling right through the summer. Quite a few opportunities to get out and witness some baseball or to find out more information about baseball. And again, this is Dr. Lona Reeves reminding you, thank you for joining us, Dr. Dreifort from Wichita State University, and here at the Kansas African American Museum for TCAM Thursdays, your midday cultural break.